Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to Grid Talks. This month's webinar is focused on energy sovereignty and solutions for Indigenous communities. The purpose of Grid Talks, this is a new webinar series here at Grid Alternatives. We aim to bring together leaders from the renewable energy field and environmental justice movement to discuss clean energy access and community-centered solutions. These webinars seek to amplify the voices of Grid's communities and share the stories, experiences, and work that are creating mission impact and systemic changes. I am your facilitator today. My name is John Teller. I'm an Oneida and Menominee Native American from Wisconsin. I'm also a Marine Corps veteran, and I'm currently serving as the communications officer for the Tribal Solar Accelerator Fund, part of Grid Alternatives. Any of our audience members, if you would like to introduce yourselves, please tell us who you are and where you're from in the chat. We would love to hear from you. I'm really excited to introduce our two panelists here today. And before we get to that, let's take care of a few quick event logistics. First of all, this webinar is going to be recorded and available later for you to rewatch and for those who are unable to join today. For any of our guests and registrants, your video and audio are automatically muted, but you can add to the chat, and your questions via the Q&A button will be available at the end of the chat for us to review. Be sure to submit your questions to the panelists. We'll ask as many as we can at the end of the session. Give or take our last 15 minutes or so. With that being said, let's get into today's events. It is my honor to introduce our two panelists today. Dena Whitaker is an author and lecturer of Indian Studies at Cal State San Marcos, and Gustavo Valdez is our Mexico project manager at Grid Alternatives. Both. Real quickly, an overview of today's webinar. This month, we acknowledge International Indigenous Peoples Day by digging deeper into the challenges and opportunities faced by Indigenous people around the globe to gain energy sovereignty. Indigenous people worldwide are among the first to face the direct consequences of climate change due to their dependence upon and close relationship with the environment and its resources. Indigenous leadership is critical to addressing environmental justice and understanding their role in advancing renewable energy solutions in their traditional homelands. During this webinar, we will discuss how locally sourced and controlled renewable energy can allow Indigenous people from around the world to take control of their energy resources, keep local dollars in the community, and reap the long-term environmental and economic benefits of their investment. With that, panelists, if you would please turn on your cameras. Dena and Gustavo, welcome to you both. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Grid Talks. It's lovely to have each of you here with us as a panelist. I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you come from, and your current role. Dena, if you would please be so kind as to start.
Hi, John. Thank you for that introduction. Dena Whitaker, and I just introduced myself in my tribal language, which is Insokchin. I'm a descendant of the Colville Confederated Tribes from the Okanagan bands. We are original to the Upper Columbia River Plateau in what is now North Central Washington. So, but I'm coming to you from Southern California, which is where I live and was born and raised, and currently work in the homelands of the Ahashiman Juaneño Band of Mission Indians in Orange County, and teach on the homelands of the Luceño Payam people in North San Diego County. So in that university environment, I teach part-time. I teach American Indian Studies, but I also do outside the university most of my work which is a variety of kind of consulting and advising, particularly around environmental justice issues, other environmental issues, and kind of a wide variety of things that I get involved with. But my work is very place-based, very community-based. So I am embedded in Native and non-Native communities alike who are working together.
Thank you, Dena. Welcome. Gustavo, welcome to Grid Talks. Please introduce yourself. You might be on mute.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gustavo Valdez. I use he, him pronouns. And well, I'm Mexican. I was born and raised in Mexico. I migrated to the US about 2012, 2013. I started living first in Missouri, in St. Louis, Missouri. I stayed there for almost 6 years, and then I moved into California almost a little bit over 6 years ago. And I come from outreach. I used to be a teacher in Mexico. I was there up until 2012. I used to be a teacher in mainly high school and college. I studied international relations and made a master's in ethics. And then when I moved to the US, I started doing outreach in Missouri within the Latino community. Well, first as an organizer for fast food workers, and that gave me kind of the basic tools for outreach to making like a policy get to the community that's intended to get. And I started like working at a community action partnership or agency. That's these offices in which people used to go and enroll in Medicare and food stamps and Medicaid. And I was there as a Spanish speaker in Missouri, which is 4% of the population is Spanish speaker, as opposed to California, 42%. And I provided access or facilitated access to the Affordable Care Act or Medicaid, Medicare, food pantry, etc. Once I moved to California, Spanish speaking is no longer a superpower, and I was just looking to do outreach in English or Spanish, whatever, just outreach to make something with a nonprofit. And that's how I ran into Grid Alternative 6 years ago. And I started coordinating solar installations in Baja California since 2017, 18, and so far we have installed almost 350 kilowatts, which doesn't mean a lot for the general audience, but that's more or less 50 of grid solar systems in indigenous communities in Baja, 30 of grid solar fridge systems also in indigenous communities of Baja with the Kumeyaay and the Pai Pai communities. 2 of grid solar systems in indigenous schools that are also in Juntas de Neji, and other systems that are not indigenous, but mainly in Tijuana, in orphanages, shelters for immigrants, shelters for people in street situation or transition, low income or low to no cost clinics, and many other projects alike in the Baja region.
Well said. I just would like to say that as we are recognizing Worldwide Indigenous Peoples Day, I'm very happy that we have such a diverse group of panelists with us today, Dena and Gustavo. I just think that we're thinking about and keeping in mind for all of our audience, not just maybe what we're accustomed to in the North American continent, knowing indigenous people. We're thinking about our Latin and our Latinx communities in Central and South America, in Africa, and all throughout the world. When we're talking about worldwide indigenous people, there are number of different issues that our indigenous people face all throughout the world. And let's get right into it, because I believe that's really at the heart of our webinar today. This question is directed at both of you, Dena and Gustavo. As we talk about indigenous people throughout the world, we have all maintained a connection to our environment, which is critical to the development and sustainability of renewable energy and environmental justice. I'd like each of you to please share your thoughts on how indigenous leaders such as yourself and others like you are helping to make an impact on Mother Earth. Dena, if you'd like to start.
Oh gosh, that's a big question. I think that has many answers, depending on the person, depending on the region, depending on their the commitments. I think that in tribal communities in the U.S., I would say that it's really focused on maintaining and building sovereignty, the capacity of nationhood, of tribal nationhood. When we're talking about something like electric grids or power grids, we're talking about tribal communities who are still struggling to reach a standard of life that most Americans already enjoy, but that in tribal communities in reservations, have been left behind because of the processes of colonialism. And so we celebrate, things like microgrids, solar powered microgrids that give basic, just some of the most basic of amenities to those communities that most other people are already enjoying. In terms of leadership and how Native people are continuing to maintain their ways of life. It's being done through the resurgence of and maintenance of culture. And of course, those cultures are based on a very different way of being on the land, of being in the world, a different orientation to reality, you could say. And that reality, is based on a very, very particular worldviews, very particular relationships to the land, and those relationships are based on ancient land tenure of being in very particular ecosystems, very particular environments for thousands of years, and it's that very long continuous relationship to land that is really what's created the conditions of sustainability for indigenous cultures. And that's really, I always say that that's what sustainability really is. It's about how societies have learned to live within the constraints of their environments in order to ensure generations into the future, what we sometimes call the 7 generations principle, which is based on people who make decisions about how they live in the world on the land that hinge on what is it going to look like for the 7 generations to come. And so there's a lot to say there, but I this is a very different orientation, a very different worldview than the dominant Eurocentric society that we are all very familiar, which is about using land in very short-term way, with short-term goals, and does not consider what the costs are for future generations. So I guess the short answer to that question is that Native people live with a very different way of looking at the world that ensured their longevity.
Absolutely. Gustavo, if I can rephrase the question again for you, I'd love to hear your insight and your response to the impacts that we see indigenous leaders such as yourself making on Mother Earth today.
I can only resonate with what Dena is saying. Energy sovereignty or independency is It's more than having electricity generated on site. It's more than the capacity to be off-grid independent. I think that for succeeding or championing environmental justice, we first have to recognize or acknowledge the fact that for centuries, inequality and marginalization have been key to where we're standing now. You see what I mean? We have to be critical and verbal about it. I think, as Dena says, it's part of that oppression system. It's why we're here. And I think that to achieve sustainability too, just as Dena said, and sustainability in renewable energy specifically, I think we have to start by those who have been discriminated first. We cannot continue ignoring those realities, those other realities. We cannot continue situating profits over people, and we can't keep having extractivism in the center. I think we have to do things differently so that technology such as solar that has the potential to benefit everyone just because the air is cleaner can be such like the solar energy can be, I see it as a leverage for empowering those others and those other realities to inciting those other individuals and groups that have been historically oppressed and left apart. I don't know if that makes sense.
So it does, because I mean, when we start talking about the challenges that we're facing, this is like a perfect segue into our next question. Gustavo, if you could just continue to elaborate a little bit. You started touching on this, the challenges that we're facing in our Indigenous communities that we need to overcome. Elaborate more on that of what you feel are the challenges that we need to overcome to achieve our goals of a more sustainable future.
Thank you. So I can continue in this little rant.
Please do.
So structurally, these communities, or the communities I have been working with and visiting for 6 years, in my particular case, there is challenges like not having cell phone signal and not having electricity or drinkable water and access to water in general, like, so they can like water their crops. It's difficult there. They don't have reliable systems to procure those also basic services or like needs to thrive in the land. So besides not having cell phone signal or electricity, that the road is difficult to access, or there is very limited or very seasonal income. The real challenge that I see is generational. Youth is living in towns that are nearby, but people leave the regional place that they were born at because there is other services and infrastructure close to them. So they move, but the land is getting empty and there is no children. And people is taking their kids to the towns nearby. And I believe that facilitating access to solar can really help some of these communities to restructure or to not go back to where they were, because that's impossible, but some families could return and somehow achieve or help sustainability in renewable energy projects or innovations or implementations, deployment.
I think you bring up a great point when you talk about our generational society. I mean, all of this, I mean, the impacts that we're trying to implement now are going to affect our next generations, but it's really up to our next generation to carry the torch, so to speak, thing that we're trying to do. It's going to be their planet that they're inheriting. So very much it's a great point. Well said.
Dena,
Dena,
I don't know what Dena thinks. looking
I-
forward to hear you.
I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, Dena, on challenges that we're facing.
You know, I always come back to what is it that we mean when we say sustainability, and I think that there are a lot of ways that we use that word. I think it can mean a lot of different things, and certainly the way that Gustavo explained it or described it in rural parts of Mexico makes a lot of sense. I mean, we're talking about just a very basic way of understanding people being able to stay put, stay in a hometown. That certainly is an aspect of sustaining, you know, a community. But I also think I always want to, you know, I tend to think critically and think kind of much more big picture and think about like what is it, what does it mean to live in a society that's so technology intensive and so reliant on extractive economies, even if it's an economy that if we move away from a fossil fuel based economy, but we're still living in a very technologically intensive society that uses a lot of electricity, that still depends on extractive resources of things like, you know, rare metals and heavy metals and lithium for battery storage.
Right.
You know, that opens up a whole other can of worms, especially for Indigenous people, because it's Indigenous people that are always, it seems, at risk for the kinds of fallout, the problems associated with technology development. And you know, lithium production is a perfect example of that. You know, there's this rush as we rush away from fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions, and we run toward, you know, clean energy, clean production of electricity via solar. Well, we still need all that technology that is based on the extraction of resources, to which Indigenous peoples are most at risk, or from which they're most at risk, especially around lithium mining right now. That's really the next big fight for Native people.
And there's that trade-off too right now, because yeah, okay, less of a dependence on fossil fuels. You know, there's really that big push right now for EV, you know, electric powered everything, electric vehicles. That those batteries have to come from somewhere, and then we open up the mining issues all over again. So it's really kind of a double-edged sword when
It
we start
is.
talking about that issue. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm always the one asking the questions that nobody wants to hear. And, you know, for me, the question is like, what does it really look like into the 7 generations to come if we want to continue to live in a society that gives us a level of comfort through electricity and technology?
Mhm.
I mean, is that sustainable in the long run? I don't really know. I'm not saying whether it is or it isn't, but I
Right.
think those are the kinds of questions that do need to be asked. I mean, Native people managed to live beautiful, healthy lives for thousands, tens of thousands of years without developing that kind of technology. And you know, we were when we were encountered by Europeans, we were thought of as primitive and uncivilized because we didn't have the kind of technology that they had, but we
Right.
also hadn't ruined our environments like they did in Europe. So, you know, I think all these things need to be interrogated. And you know, if we're, because we are at you know, a level of existential crisis
Mhm.
globally.
Uh, that also segues into our next question. Dena, this next question is directly specifically for you. When we start talking about some of these bigger issues that we're facing in the United States today, one of the big issues right now is the and the influx of money into the renewable energy and environmental industry is the Inflation Reduction Act. You know, we feel that this is definitely a step in the right direction, especially for Indigenous people in the United States. It's a funding opportunity. to help achieve, our green energy goals and sustainability. But I'd love to hear your take on these resets that are going on, from a policy standpoint, from an environmental justice standpoint, and federal policy, and we're just seeing a worldwide trend toward decreased carbon footprint and reliance on fossil fuels. Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I think it should be applauded. The administration is, taking is more progressive on climate change policy than by far than any administration in the past, and that's worth celebrating. And I'm well aware of the kinds of projects that are being funded. I keep getting asked to be on grant projects that are going after some of that funding to be, an advisor or to just be a co-PI or something on those projects. They're really productive for tribal communities, and they help build capacity. That's one of the things that tribes have a hard time with, is capacity to keep up with all the things that they need. And I was reading something this morning about Ron DeSantis, and some conservatives who were like refusing to accept some of that money, and I'm not really sure what that is, other than making a political issue out of it. But I think that it's really important to have. I mean, it's not even just energy projects that are being funded, but all kinds of environmental regeneration projects. And so,
Right.
so it's big package stuff. And one of the things that I'm really inspired by in terms of how the administration is approaching Indigenous people is that they are really prioritizing, Indigenous voices and Indigenous knowledge. I was really encouraged, was sometime last year around November, the White House issued a policy statement saying that they will officially be including Indigenous knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge perspectives into land use policy. And I was really happy. Like they actually referenced my book, As Long as Grass Grows, in that policy statement. And I was pretty amazed that it was being read at that level. But that was just my own little selfish reaction to it. But the policy, the White House had established the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee right from the get-go. That was a 27-member panel that prioritized environmental justice into its policy planning. And we have two Native American activists and scholars on that committee, Jade Begay and Kyle White, who are so important to the work. So that's a whole new level. Of course, we have Deb Haaland as the Secretary
Right.
of the Interior, and this new valuing of Indigenous knowledge is new. And
Mhm.
this gives me hope and optimism for what the future possibly looks like. So and all of
Mhm.
that combined with the funding, that's great. And I think we still need to have these bigger conversations too.
I think this is a huge topic. I wish we had more time to discuss more in depth. We could probably just go on for days and days about these topics, but definitely some very important things brought up there. And your insight is greatly appreciated. I'm sure we'll get some questions, from our guests as well, our registrants, at the end. I would like to switch gears really quickly. I'd like to give Gustavo an opportunity. I'd like to ask you a specific question, Gustavo, about some of the work that you're doing for grid alternatives in Mexico. If you would please be willing to share with us some insight about a project perhaps that you've done in Mexico, and give us an example of community powered renewable energy work being done there. Mute.
Okay.
There you go. There you go.
I actually just saw a question that's related what I'm thinking right now about your question. So, okay, I'm gonna put just one example to keep it like very focused. Sure. There is a project that we have coming up in September 17th with a group of volunteers, and this project is bringing a solar system to a new building that is working as a school. It's called the project. Well, the land that it is at the ranch, or the family is the family Mesquich. It's a Kumeyaay family. It's Miss Señora Yolanda, or yeah, Miss Yolanda Mesquich is the matriarch of the family. She has about 9 grandchildren, 5 kids, and all of them are there in their ranch. This is part of a bigger area that's also recognized as Kumeyaay territories, that is called Juntas de Neji. This is obviously on the Mexican side of the Kumeyaay nation. And this project, the escuela, this school Mesquich that we're about to install, took and couldn't take less than 4 years to happen. And I'm going to address the question right now. It took 4 years to happen, and it couldn't take less than 4 years because the building is new. She had this idea since the very beginning that we started working with the community in Juntas de Neji. And well, we have been working with the Kumeyaay community since 2018. It's a very extended area, 30,000 acres, more or less. And it's divided, like you have to drive almost 2 hours to get from one side to the other of the community, because it's divided by mountains and like dirt roads and a river. And it has 2 main areas, the upper Neji and the lower Neji, Neji de arriba and Neji de abajo. And we started visiting 5 years ago. I started visiting with government representatives, which didn't go so well. And I started going by myself, establishing personal, individual connections with some of the community leaders or the elders of the community. And that's how we could move forward. And I say that we couldn't have done it before because since there is no access at all to electricity, or very improvised also solar technologies or other technologies, we have to start little by little. I cannot get there with a whole system that's gonna power your internet if you don't have internet, if you don't have a fridge first, if you don't have a way to see by night first. It's not that we're like breaking or like stopping from the development, but it's also a step-by-step work with and not at the communities, if you see what I mean.
Right.
So since then we started working with first means to see by night, and then we installed one school that before COVID was being used as a school for the kids that were there. Now it's a different whole story because COVID hit. The school lost the registration as school. They're not sending a teacher anymore, and so it's been like that since then. They're working on that. But on the other side of Neji, Señora Yolanda, Miss Yolanda, started the building of a school to specifically teach the Kumeyaay language, which is a language that is being lost and that is not being transferred to younger generations. And she's been going at it even under COVID because she had enough power to have internet. She hired the internet service and started giving classes during COVID, for example, over or online to her students. And then now that's over, and now that she has a building, she is willing to have more access to internet, more access to be able to connect, no more access to energy or solar energy to connect computers, to keep the internet up and running for a little longer, or for like the whole day instead of only a few hours, because then the battery goes off. And it has been like that, working little by little, that working with the community in the center, putting in the center the needs and their strengths and what they already have, not what they need or they don't have. Working with them to find solutions to what they want to do and just facilitating access to it. So I think this example of Escuela Mesquich pictures a little bit what I am trying to say. Sorry if I went a little off tracks with history and previous projects. We can go on details.
That's completely fine. I think it's important that, you know, we're looking at this issue from a higher level. Change is often difficult, and like you said, it does happen incrementally. You know, it does. You know, maybe a community here, you know, some houses there, a school there, and change is happening, you know, and which is good, but it's often difficult. It can be, change can be, you know, slow to come in our communities, especially in the face of social change, economic pressure, financial situations, which are constantly changing in our economies and in our social and environmental situations. This next question is for both of you, and it's really directed at change. If you could change just one thing to help make tomorrow a better place, what would it be? And I'll open up to both of you.
Yeah, that's I had to think about that one, and I'm not really sure, but I just go back to what I think is the most important thing, is that, which is really the most important threat to our existence as humans on the planet, and that's climate change, global warming, you know, whatever we want to call it, but we are seeing it. It's no longer just in the future. It's here. It's now. And we are seeing, you know, the impacts of it in extreme weather experiences, in migration. You know, we're going to see greater population migration as various areas become uninhabitable. It's going to do nothing but get worse. And, you know, as much as the administration in the United States, the Biden administration, has prioritized and is funding solutions to that, or at least ways to address it, I think it's not nearly enough. And, you know, until all the governments of the world are also prioritizing that, you know, we are so far behind the curve of where we should be, of where science was telling us decades ago where we needed to be now in terms of our you know, greenhouse gas emissions. You know, you know, I don't know if we've reached the tipping point from which there is no return. I don't know. But it's kind of looking that way, you know, that every passing year we're kind of getting there. And so you know, my big wish is that all the people and governments of the world prioritize climate change, and especially in the developed world like the US, that uses more resources than people in the global South do. So, you know, we need to be taking more responsibility as societies and be willing to look at, you know, what is it that we're willing to give up so that everybody else can live. That's the hard question. And that's, you know, ultimately why the Kyoto Protocol failed, among other things. You know, it was the only thing that we had, you know, in terms of a global approach, you know, collaborative global approach to dealing with climate change. And, you know, of course, we know what happened to that. We have the Paris Accords now, but the Paris Accords are completely voluntary. And and they don't do nearly enough to address the problems. So, if I had a magic wand and I could wave it, I would just say yes. All of a sudden, everybody gets it that we need to really uh, work way harder to address
Mm.
climate change.
I think when we talk about climate change and the development and advancement of our technology today, I mean, those two things correlate very coincidentally, that as our technology has advanced within the last 100 years, how our environmental change has gotten worse in that same time frame. Definitely. I mean, Gustavo, I know this is a very broad question. I know it's I'm only asking for one thing, but I think it's like Dena said, there's lots of issues. I mean, there's obviously more than just one thing, but if you could, if this were a perfect world and you could change one thing, what would it be? What would be at the top of your priority?
Borders. The borders. I
Hmm.
think I would at least establish like regions instead of hard border where the borders are not seen, or like borders don't actively search to divide. You see, like borders that are seen as junctions, not as separations. And I think that concept of border, if
Mhm.
not eliminating them, because I know the state is like super powerful and like big thing to deal with, but at least opening up the concept of border, uh, to see it more as a junction than a separation. And if we do those regions, we could also maybe, for example, in Southern California with Northern Mexico, that would imply a recognition of our past and that the borders are like modern and an invention that has not been there before, and that it's optional to keep it under that concept. And it's only through recognizing our past, and this concept would reflect the effort also that we have in uniting. Because you know what? The border is there and the pollution doesn't stop at the border. Surprise.
You're right.
So,
You're right. You're very right. I think that also, I mean, when we talk about borders, we talk about nations and
yes.
the different nations throughout the world. There's there really very much is the haves and the have-nots, and a lot of the different nations throughout the world that are the have-nots are dictated by the nations that do and set world policy. And yeah, completely. And at the end of the day, we are all one people. You know, we come from different places, we speak different languages, we have different shades of our skin, but at the end of the day, we are all one people. And that's really, at the heart, the way that I feel, and I feel that with what you say as well with
And,
that. So
and
thank you for
finally,
sharing that.
I totally agree with
Yeah.
what Dina was saying, that we should like see clearly and be critical of who to tackle, and the big polluters. They're there.
Mm-hmm.
We can identify them. So let's start pretending. Let's stop pretending.
I have one final question, and then I'd like to leave a little bit of time at the end of our webinar. I know we have a few minutes left to address a few questions that are coming in by our audience. So my final question for both of you is, our voice. Our voice as Indigenous people needs to be heard. And this is especially relevant when we're talking about worldwide Indigenous people. What can we do to help ensure that our voices are heard throughout the world?
Well, I always, I always say education. I'm an educator, and education in all its forms. Education comes in, countless forms. It's school, it's media, it's, writing, it's just talking person to person. It's all kinds of ways, but we're in a place where we're shifting narratives, we're changing paradigms, we're unfolding a paradigm. We're going from systemic indigenous erasure, because it's structural. Settler colonialism is a structure of indigenous elimination and erasure, but there is a movement now that is pushing back against that. Like some of the things we talked about earlier about Deb Haaland being in this key role in the administration of the most powerful country in the world, arguably, is really significant. And some of the native people whose voices are being respected and heard and asked for their opinions and brought into projects. All of that is really a big change, and so I think the train has left the station. I don't know if there's, I think we are always in the process of decolonizing. If we're talking about systems thinking and colonialism as the system, I don't think that it's ever in a settler system that is structural in nature. Decolonization is always going to be ongoing. I always say it's more of a journey than a destination. So we always will have to be working at it. And I think that's the work. And a starting place for decolonizing is indigenizing, and that's unerasing native presence, regenerating native knowledge, and having a seat at the table, at all the tables.
Sure, absolutely. Gustavo?
Exactly. Like, I took some little notes because I didn't want to leave those great ideas. I was just resonating a lot and like agreeing much, because my first thought was like, okay, generate spaces and policies that actively look to bring down the colonial, genocidal, heteropatriarchal system down, and hear the voices that have been silenced for so long. But we have to create those spaces and set those structures that were, and I don't want to say we destroyed before, but that were destroyed before, no matter who, were just one. That's all. I'm shaking. So,
it's okay, man. You're doing great.
Yeah. No, I'm just very excited and like glad to have a space to share this out loud.
I'm glad that we have this platform to share. It is recorded. It is going to be able to be shared. I'm just ecstatic with the answers and the dialogue that we've gotten today. It's just fantastic, and I wish we had longer to talk, because I feel like we could just keep going on and on and on about these issues, because they're not being talked about enough. They're not being addressed enough. And it's through platforms like this today, through Grid Talks, that we're getting an opportunity to share with more people and to have our voices be heard. So thank you for that. We do have some questions from the audience that I'd like to get to as well. Gustavo, this one's specifically for you. The question is, how has solar impacted education in the remote areas Grid installs solar in?
Precisely, with the Escuela Mesquich, the project that I was talking about, they didn't have how to power a projector, a TV, a computer, internet service, and I think, or they have to go to the closest grid-tied school, which is over an hour away from where they originally used to live. And these type of projects, just, I don't say like it makes happen, no, but it puts a little barrier down so that people and communities can do what they want and in education services or in educational like applications of solar, it has helped so that they can basically increase communication and access to information in general.
Our next question is for both of you. It says, what advice do you have for Indigenous communities that want to get involved in environmental justice? What's the first step they should take?
Well, for Indigenous communities, I think
Yes.
Indigenous communities are always already in that fight. I don't know whether they call it environmental justice or not. You know, the processes of self-determination and sovereignty, and land protection and tribal economic development, all of those things are part of you know, restoring their relationship to the land and maintaining their ability to govern themselves. And that all of that is inseparable from the land and from the historical processes that sought to dispossess them. So you know, yeah, I mean, I know that's pretty abstract and maybe kind of vague, but at the same time, you know, for Native people, you know, it's all connected. It's part of a continuum of, you know, fighting for survival, really. And you know, but you know, there are things like you know, doing research on, you know, the kinds of projects that are available through things like the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, you know, the funding that's available for building things like solar grids and doing other, you know, huge array of projects. So you know, and pay attention to the land back movement. That's another thing. The land back movement, that's a whole other conversation. But you know, without land, there is no sovereignty. Without land, there is no, you know, need for a solar grid, you know.
Right.
So it's all connected.
I think what resonates with me personally from what you just stated is that they might not be specifically, you know, environmental justice. It might not be specifically titled as what it was by our question, but there are other movements out there, the MMIW movement, you know, some of the other things that you know, that may be more from an activism standpoint. You know, not everything is necessarily directed at environmental justice or renewable energy. We do have a lot of issues out there, and I guess a word of advice I would recommend is talk to your people within your tribe, talk to your leadership who might have more of those answers and probably already have a connection to where they can get more information about that, especially when we're going after Inflation Reduction Act money as well. Our next question is for both of you. What sustainable practices can we all learn from Indigenous communities that are practiced today? What sustainable practices can we all learn from Indigenous communities that are practiced today?
Take only what you need.
That's probably one of our foundational practices.
Time is a concept that is not to be rushed.
Yeah.
That's so perfectly said. I don't know that I don't know
Yeah.
that I could say it
Yeah.
any better than that, actually.
I can say back home in Wisconsin with my Menominee people, we're very much into forestry, sustainable yield practices. You know, and you can see in the surrounding areas around our reservation, it's all been clear cut. And you can even see the outline of our reservation from the trees from outer space, because we have that sustainable yield practice. We only take what we need, you know, and they probably could have clear cut the reservation years ago and made a huge profit from it, but then we'd have nothing left, you know, so they can continue those practices. That's, I think, at the heart of what you're saying as well, Gustavo. Well said.
We teach, and I teach this a lot, It's the basis for for our education at Cal State San Marcos and our American Indian Studies department. And we focus on the four values of an American Indian worldview that, it distills down to what we call the four R's, and that's understanding the world through relationality, through reciprocity, responsibility, and respect. So it's a shift in worldview and how we understand our place in the world. So and I always invite my students to think about that and to think about how do you incorporate that into your own life.
Very well said. We do have a few more questions. I know we're at time. So I would say to you, Dena and Gustavo, if you're willing to stay on for a few more minutes, we can. Otherwise, we can probably try and answer those questions through the chat as well. It's up to either one of you. Are you both able to stay on for a few more minutes?
I can stay for a few.
Okay. We got a couple more questions, so we'd just like to get through them. Dena, this one is specifically for you. What does or what should a global environmental movement look like for Indigenous communities?
Oh, a global environmental movement well, I think we already see it, and it looks really different in different places. And I would say we can't talk about it. We can't separate it from the politics on the ground in various areas. And Indigenous peoples, and that varies from area to area. The Indigenous peoples in Kenya and their relationship with the Kenyan government is really different than the Indigenous relationship in Canada to the Canadian government. And the same can be said for everywhere. So that said, it looks the same everywhere, and it's always about protecting the land and maintaining the relationship to land and trying not to get kicked off, and protecting the rights to use the land in their traditional ways. And so those battles are being fought in countless ways, and the challenges are wide. They're immense and they're varied. So what it looks like in the US is really different than what it looks like in South America. So I think we can't make too many generalizations, but ultimately that environmental movement is about protecting the precious resources, the viability of the land that we all live on now. That's what Native people are always fighting for, it seems to me.
Well said. Well said. We do have time for one final question. This is a very specific question. It's addressed to both of you. And the question from our audience says, they're curious what everyone thinks about solar geoengineering to reduce heat right now. And it says, listen to How to Save a Planet episode presenting Catalyst. Solar geoengineering, is it worth the risk? I'm not familiar with solar geoengineering.
I'm not either.
Yeah. Gustavo, maybe that's, yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to just using the words, but no, I'm really not familiar with geoengineering.
We're sorry about that one. What we did ask the question, so we got to our questions from our audience. I just want to say thank you to Gustavo, to Dena for being here on Grid Talks today. We certainly wish you the best. You've been fantastic guests, and also a big shout out to our audience. We'll see you again soon at the next episode of Grid Talks. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Uh-huh.